We're ranking every single killer in Dead by Daylight from worst to best. We'll go over some of their pros and cons, and remember, this is just my opinion. Feel free to leave yours down below. Hold on, pause the video. Before we continue, I want to let you know that today's video is actually sponsored, and today's sponsor is Last Island of Survival. In this game, you're going to collect, build, and expand, which are all essential things for you to do in order to survive. Once you have enough resources, you can start to build your own home and your own base and watch your creativity unfold. And when you finally survived long enough, you may face other challenges like raids and attacks by other players, so eventually you'll need to learn how to defend your homeland by taking the first move. By doing this, you might even enjoy battling the most, having a sense of dominating your competition with some of your friends. Last Island of Survival is also celebrating their 4th year anniversary, and with this occasion, there's a few major updates that you'd probably want to know about. There's a new classic battle mode, which is a fast-paced battle. This lowers the weight of paid growth features such as the talent pets, aircraft, tanks, mechas, and it also makes the battles fully return to the core third-person shooter combat. There's match activity, where daily events are offered to players to win lottery tickets, which can be used to draw rewards. Lottery slots can be linked for receiving additional rewards as well. There's also some new pets, the 3 ducks, which can automatically rescue players, and 2 new mechanical beasts for evolution feature. There's also a new weapon, the M202 rocket launcher. One of the coolest things about this update is the human-powered glider, which is set up for 2 players. One person can control it, while the co-pilot is able to shoot this while riding. The best part is there's no fuel required, and it only consumes your stamina, which you can replenish by recovering on the ground. So in this open world survival game, there are tons of ways to enjoy whether you're building or battling, so I highly recommend that you guys give it a try. The link will be down in the description, and you guys know that sponsors help out the channel a lot, so it'd mean the world if you can go and drop a download and try out Last Island of Survival. So again, a big thank you to the sponsor. We can unpause and take a look at this tier list. Sadly, coming in last place is the Trapper. Trapper is my main, but it's really clear that Behavior just doesn't want to give any more love to the Trapper, and sadly, this is probably where he's going to sit for a long time. Now, I play Trapper at high MMR, and I still can get some pretty good games, but there's just too many cons that outweigh all of the pros to Trapper, and I would love to put him up higher, but realistically, in this day and age, it's kind of hard to do so. For starters, the setup time is just insanely long. By the time you're done setting up, 2 to 3 gens are already popped, giving you such an uphill battle that you have to go against, and especially against good survivors, it's going to be really difficult to do it, ultimately leading to probably 0 to 1 kill. On the chance that you do manage to catch survivors off guard and they decide to run into your traps, it's little to not as rewarding because your power can't really help you protect that kill or do anything about it unless you're in the basement. On top of that, you have no map pressure ability, and if someone disarms your trap and completely negates your power, you're just stuck being a sad M1 killer. Behavior said they're pretty happy where Trapper lies stats-wise, so we're probably not going to see any changes from him anytime in the future. So sadly, Trapper is the worst killer currently in the game. The Pig is next, and the Pig has a little bit more to offer than the Trapper, but still not as much as any other of the killers on the list. The crouching ability is nice just to catch people off guard at some loops or pallets, but against some experienced survivors, all they'll need to do is just run away while you're crouching. So the only time this is effective is ultimately at the start of the game, where maybe you can get a sneak attack on a survivor, and even then you'd have to run some good add-ons to make this good. The head traps just pretty much do nothing, and they hinder the survivors very minimally, just making her pretty much a gimmick type of killer. On top of that, you have no map pressure whatsoever, and the only way you can possibly maybe get some pressure going is if you run the right add-ons to give you some more time with those traps on their heads, and even then, it still will have to sacrifice an entire build just to do it effectively, making the Pig the 2nd worst killer in the game. Next on the list is Myers, and for one of the licensed big killers, he is really old school. Back in the days, Myers used to be pretty damn good, but in this day and age, he doesn't stand a chance with some of the other killers. Apart from the obvious no map pressure, your power is limited. There's a limited amount of time that you can charge your power, and eventually, if you stalk a survivor too much, they're pretty much of no use to you. If you manage to get your power to be used a lot of times, then you're pretty much negated out of your power completely. On top of that, once you start off the trial, you're automatically weaker than your normal state and weaker than every killer in the game because you have to stock up and then get to your normal state essentially. And even when you are in your most ferocious state at tier 3, it only lasts for 60 seconds, which can easily be outran because there's nothing on this kit that essentially helps you except for the one-shot capability. The only time you can get this to really do some damage is if you 99 it, wait for someone to go for an unhook or get them in an awkward position, and then you're able to get them. But even to get to that point, you have to waste your valuable time standing still staring at them rather than continuing the chase and gaining your power. Ultimately, that puts him in the third worst spot in the game. The Clown is next on the list, and the Clown was the first attempt from Behavior to stop looping in the game, and for the time and what it was, it worked pretty okay, but now this day and age, it just doesn't really meet to the standards of what a killer should be in Dead by Daylight. They tried fixing this when they decided to add in the other version of the bottles, but that didn't really do too much as you don't get too much value out of it, so you're still stuck with the same old Clown using the regular gas. While this may be nice to maybe zone survivors in certain directions, a good survivor would just pre-drop a pallet and then it just defeats the entire purpose of your bottles. On top of that, taking the time to reload after you've used your bottles can lose some valuable time in chases, and the only time this really works is if someone is silly enough to stay in the smoke, continue to loop, to then get a free hit. Just like all the other killers on the list, the Clown doesn't really have anything that helps him too much with map pressure, so he is the next worst killer in the game. Moving up a tier, we're going to the C tier now, as I would like to call it. I'm going to put the Trickster here. The Trickster is pretty good at one-on-one chases. If you're being looped, or you're looping, I should say, a Trickster, chances are you're gonna die. The only time you'll be able to avoid some of these is if you keep cutting corners, pre-dropping pallets, and keeping that line of sight out of the way. So in a one-on-one chase, the Trickster is really efficient at doing this. However, as we've been saying, and I sound like a broken record now, he is a slow killer, and he doesn't have anything that helps him keep that map pressure up. So while you manage to get one person down, even if you throw a million knives across the way, it's super easy to dodge if you're really far, and it doesn't help you with distance, unlike other killers on the list. So you're stuck being 110, chasing a survivor. When you get them down, you have to pretty much run and go get another survivor, but by the time you do that, in this day and age, in DBD, gens are going to be popping, and you're not going to be able to hit all the pressure going around all over the map, so it puts the Trickster pretty low on the list. Next up is the Legion, and certain add-ons with the Legion can definitely make their kit a little bit better. However, if you're just playing your games normally, chances of you getting multiple hits stringing them together are very low. The Legion is hit and run, as you know, so once you injure somebody, you have to pretty much leave them, let them be, and go for somebody else. If you decide to actually stick with them, then you have to exit your power, go on a cooldown, and then initiate that chase, which at that point, you're just a regular 115% movement speed killer. It doesn't really work out that well, so your best play and your best game style will be to hit and run. During this time, most people will decide to keep staying injured to counteract you, and everyone's typically far when it comes to the trials. And even if everybody's close together and one person is far away, yes, you can get multiple people injured, but then your chases are just going to be as if you were a normal killer. Now, in the time that this does work and you're able to get a nice down on somebody, it does feel pretty satisfying, and it actually works out quite well because now you've gotten everybody injured and one person down. But this is so rare to happen, and getting everybody grouped up like that, especially in some of the early game where you need the most of your pressure, that it puts Legion pretty low on the list. Again, there's certain builds like the Never Sleep pills that you can run and combine this with Mural Sketch or something along the lines of that to really amplify his power, but even then, that's a trade-off, which puts the Legion pretty low on the list. The Wraith is next on the list, and the Wraith is pretty good. With the ability to stealth and be mobile, it's better than most of the killers that we've spoken about already. Having that mobility itself while you're cloaked is really beneficial to you, because now you can actually apply some decent map pressure. Especially if you're running some viable add-ons like the Bone Clapper, you can catch people off guard, especially during the early game where that pressure is gonna be necessary. You also can do a multitude of different things, especially if you catch survivors in awkward positions like body blocking pallets, vaults, or even trapping them in corners if needed, uncloaking and getting a free hit. The hit and run idea reigns supreme with the Wraith, and you can constantly use this to your advantage to make sure that you're keeping the pressure among all the survivors. But the Wraith is one of the most versatile killers in the game, where you can make some pretty good builds. Now that's where all the good things pretty much stop. Again, the Wraith is just a regular 115 killer when it comes down in chase, and his power itself doesn't help him in the chase. So it's more of a tool to be stealthy and be mobile, and maybe even get a hit while you're uncloaking. But besides that, that's all the Wraith has to offer, putting him pretty low on the list. The Doctor is next on the list, and the Doctor has some good things that can help him out. Now, unlike the Wraith, he doesn't have that much mobility, but he has information and a power that can help him in the chase. If you manage to get some good shocks in on survivors that are looping or near a pallet, you can stop them from doing this completely and getting some good hits on them. You can also use your static blast to get information to know where all of the survivors are located if they're inside of your field, and you can even use your projections to find out where some of the survivors are at, giving you key information when needed. Now, as I mentioned, he doesn't really have too much of that map pressure, but if a survivor does get into tier 3, they'll have to stop to snap out of it, which can give you some good time to catch up to them, and that's time that they're not working on generators, getting saves, or anything along the lines of that. So his power mainly helps him in the chase, which is pretty good, and you can get some nice hits on people. However, without being able to traverse the map that well, such as the other killers, he's just a little bit lower on the list, and you can still take advantage of some of these plays if you can get the Doctor to continue to static blast and you avoid it, or you pre-drop or pre-jump through windows. The Doctor is pretty decent, but still low on the list. Freddy is next on the list, and Freddy is pretty well-rounded. He has both of the things that we've been talking about, which is having a little bit of mobility, although limited, and a power that can help him in the chase. Now, depending on if you use the snares or the pallets can dictate how the game goes. A lot of people actually don't like using the pallets, but I do, especially towards the late game, as I find it helps you a little bit more with survivors being caught off guard and you being able to get some easy hits. But if we're talking about the snares itself, this can also help you making survivors a lot slower in very good looping spots. On top of that, Freddy does have the ability to teleport to certain generators once the power is off a cooldown, and you can get some decently good map pressure. You can also use this to mind game if need be, but that's about it. Freddy is a well-rounded character in that regard, but nothing really goes above average. It's just really average, and it just stops right there. On top of that, survivors can wake up and counteract your power directly. Again, there's not really much to say about Freddy. He's just pretty meh in my opinion. Next on the list, on the B tier, we're starting off the B tier, is the Demogorgon. And Demogorgon has everything that you would need in your kit to be a successful killer. He has a great power that allows you to shred attack and cut chases off pretty decently well for survivors to either be zoned or even pre-drop pallets or second guess their vaults, which can ultimately lead to you getting some good hits if you're patient. And he has the ability to go to different parts of the map if you're using your portals correctly. Now, the drawback to this is that if you want to move these and get these out of zones that really aren't used anymore, survivors are going to have to break this. You aren't able to break this yourself. And on top of that, survivors can break this, which can, lead to your power being, shut down when you need to use it. Now, as I mentioned, he is pretty well-rounded though. You have a nice power to help you in chases, and there's a lot of things that you can learn to just kind of trick survivors in doing certain actions that can lead you to getting a good hit. However, you still can fall short with this. If you play perfectly and you are not getting baited by any of the survivors, then you'll get your chases down pretty quickly, as you can cut off that distance really nicely. However, if you're not as perfect, you can miss some of these attacks, which will give survivors a huge window of advantage. On top of that, if your portals are in awkward positions that don't really help you that much and survivors decide not to use this whatsoever, then you're kind of screwed in that regard. And maybe you have something that is tactical. Survivors can just break this when they're around and you would have to go and replace it. So when it comes down to some of these bigger maps, it's going to be a little bit difficult to keeping all those portals active, making sure survivors are not breaking them while you're still dictating your chases and doing all of that. Overall, he's pretty just in the middle, everything that you would need on a good killer, and he's just pretty average overall, nothing that stands out as some of the other killers. The Ghostface is next on the list, and I know a lot of people have love for Ghostface. I like Ghostface too, but just not that much in this game. Now, Ghostface, just like Myers, can stalk around corners and be creepy on you, and this power also gives you the ability to one-shot your survivors. What's great about this is that you can prime this on certain survivors and catch them off guard or in nice chases where you can easily get that hit off on them, and you can actually continue to do this indefinitely, unlike Myers, and use this whenever you like. You don't have to be in tier 3 in order to use it. Your power can also help you in certain chases if you just want to be stealthy, or in the beginning of the game for getting a sneaky attack or even some grabs on generators if someone is not paying attention. That's pretty much where all the good stuff stops though. Ghostface is just an M1 killer and there's nothing that helps him with mobility whatsoever, so it really comes down to how well the survivors are, and if they're good at looping, you're going to be in for a long day. Even if you can get someone exposed for that 60 seconds and they decide to loop you and loop you and loop you, you'll never be able to catch them. And then, once they know your Ghostface, they're always going to be looking out for you to kick you out of your power. That's another issue that I have with the power, and I'm sure you guys have seen this on both sides. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's still a bit puzzling to me how it exactly works. Survivors can find some crazy angles to kick you out of your power, and sometimes they'll be staring right at you, and your power won't leave whatsoever. So that doesn't necessarily help. I'm sure there is some logic behind this, but I could never seem to find it whatsoever, and it just makes it feel pretty awkward and bad overall. Nonetheless, you still can get some pretty good hits with Ghostface, and you can catch people off guard, especially if you have them 99 stocked. But again, it really does come down to how good the survivors are and if they're good at looping, and how that map is going to play in your favor. If it's too wide open with too many pallets, or if there's too much going on, you're going to have a hard time because you're just a regular M1 killer at the end of the day. Ah, yes, Bubba. I do love me some Bubba, and shout out to TCM. I've been having a lot of fun on that game. Bubba is next on the list, and I always have had a good spot for Bubba. I enjoy playing Bubba. He's pretty fun, and just getting that satisfying down with the chainsaw is so nice. It's super strong as well, and Bubba has one of the best, if not the best, crushers when it comes down to people that are on the hook. I'm sure you know all the memes with Insidious Bubba. Now, if you're in a chase, you can rev up your chainsaw, get survivors to pre-drop pallets, and if they don't decide to drop the pallet, you will probably get them if you have enough charges, and it can make for some easy downs really quickly. On top of that, if you are running the right add-ons, you still can even use your chainsaw a little bit tactically. I know, pretty crazy, but you can cut off some distance really fast on survivors and get a last-second nice hit if you're running some of the engravings and chili, etc. Now, survivors' best things against you will be using vaults in order to stop you, or if they don't use vaults, pre-dropping those pallets to make sure that you're eating them all up, and that's all that they really have to go against Bubba. Bubba is pretty average, and he stands out a little bit more when it comes down to how viable he can be in the sense of downing survivors, because his lethalness is pretty high, getting that one-shot capability, especially doing it to multiple survivors. If you play a little bit more defensively, this works out even better, and you get some nice hits and easy downs. Again, as I said, the only main counters are vaults or pre-dropping, and eventually, if you're on a map that doesn't favor that, you're going to run out of time and Bubba's going to gun you down. Now, Bubba, again, he isn't like the Blight or the Nurse that can just keep this pressure going insanely quick, and that's why he's not higher on the list, but when it comes down to lethalness, he's pretty up there. The Hillbilly is next on the list, and it's so sad to see the Hillbilly just drop down so low on this list as the years go on, and it's not necessarily because the Hillbilly is becoming weaker. Yes, they've made some changes to the add-ons that make all of them pretty much useless, I will acknowledge that, But it's just that there's much more better killers in today's day and age. Being one of the OGs, his power is still pretty old school, and it works out quite well in a lot of situations, but it feels weird without playing with some of those nice add-ons that we used to have in the past. So Hillbilly has some great mobility, one of the best mobilities in the game. You can just zip around the map whenever you like, and the only thing that will stop you is if you hit an object. So having that mobility is fantastic. On top of that, he has the ability to insta-down you if he hits you with that chainsaw, which can help with those cross maps or in some good loops if you know how to play Hillbilly. On top of that, that power works fantastic when it comes down to chase, with zoning survivors in certain directions, making sure they're not going to certain vaults, forcing them into lockers, to pre-drop, or even getting zoned into areas that they don't want to be. You can also do a little bit of text, or you could just flick your chainsaw a little bit, go around corners, or just tap it one time when someone's by a pallet to get an easy pallet hit. Now, on certain maps, this can be a pain in the ass because there's a lot of random things that you can hit and then it really doesn't feel that good. And then on top of that, windows are going to be your biggest factor that you're going to have to worry about, similar to Leatherface. On top of that, if your charge time is pretty long, which it probably will be, survivors still can make it to a vault or even turn sharp corners to throw you off. Now, ultimately, that does depend a little bit more on your skill level, but if you're just getting stiffed on a map and all of the vaults are in an area, you're gonna have a hard time using your chainsaw and you'll be stuck being an M1 killer. However, if these things aren't in play, you'll be pretty lethal. Having that mobility and being able to one-shot survivors when it comes down to it, Hillbilly is still a pretty good killer. And again, that mobility and that lethality makes him pretty decent. It's just the add-ons and some maps that can really not be in his favor. Ultimately, he's still pretty good and pretty decent at the game. Nemesis is next on the list, and I like Nemesis. I really do. The zombies is the first thing that I do want to touch on. They're all over the place when it really comes down to it. Sometimes they can be a big annoyance to some of the survivors. Sometimes they really don't do anything. But they're always going to be on the track of doing something. That being getting after the survivors one way or the other. This can also give you some good information when you're across the map. If you could see the arms and the zombies walking in a certain direction, you might be able to find somebody. On top of that, if they are by generators or even a hooked survivor, this works out beautifully in your favor. When it comes down to your power itself, you do need to take some time to level it up, and once you get it to maximum terror, it's pretty effective. You can break some pallets, which helps you out super much in chases. And there's this weird thing where if you drop your tentacle a little bit early and then a survivor runs into it, they still get injured. The downside to this is that you do have to hit a survivor 3 times in order to fully injure them, but once they're already infected, this works like a charm. There's not really much that can stop you when it comes down to pallets or vaults, because you'll be able to easily hit a survivor before they do this and even zone them in certain situations. So it works out quite well for the Nemesis. On top of that, survivors always have to keep track of that infection as well, and the zombies. So there's a lot that goes on in the survivor's head that they need to maintain while still being chased by Nemesis. I put him up here because there's a lot of pressure, even though he doesn't have map pressure, that currently goes on, and he has great one-on-one chase potential that's even better than a Hillbilly and Bubba, because vaults pretty much mean nothing to him. In fact, you kind of want survivors to vault so they can get that nice, easy hit. The Singularity is next, and while a little bit tricky to play, once you get the hang of it, the Singularity is actually a pretty decent killer. You have some fantastic map pressure, as you can pretty much eyeball anywhere on the map whenever you want. So even if you're not getting your pods to hit a survivor, you can actively know where somebody's at. Now, this can be disabled with EMPs, and that's the one downside to using this power, but it still can be pretty beneficial if you use it correctly. If you place these tactically, you'll always have that pressure on the map, and if you manage to hit survivors with the pods, you can either teleport to them by hitting them directly or using other pods. When doing this, you get your overclock mode, which is a little finicky, but if you're right on top of somebody, you can either break a pallet, you can get to the other side of the vault, or if you take a stun, you can easily down him because you're going to have that Spirit Fury built in. So having that relentless pressure on some of the survivors is pretty damn good, because as soon as they run away, if they already have a pod, you can shoot them, get right back into that chase, which is really good. On top of that, always being able to see pretty much everywhere is pretty damn good as well. So when it comes down to pressure and map pressure, the Singularity is pretty good at doing that. On top of that, you can get those nice hits through pallets, things like that. But again, he doesn't excel in any of the other places. He's just pretty average with some really high pressure if played correctly, putting him in a nice medium B spot, which is a little bit higher on the B tier list. Next on the list is the Dredge. And Dredge, as we mentioned for some of the other killers, in my opinion, has one of the best balanced type of gameplay. Again, fantastic map pressure. I mean, you can teleport anywhere you want, and yes, this can be countered, which again is one of the only downsides to this, with survivors being able to lock some of the lockers. Now, if you do end up in a locker, it just takes a few more seconds to jump out, and you have some insane map pressure where you're on one side of the map all the way to the other side in no time. On top of that, you can use your husk, or your remnant, I should say, I was trying to think of the word there, in order to make some of those chases around good loops pretty difficult for the survivors. It'll have them second guessing if you're actually going to teleport back to it, or if you're just going to continue with that chase, and if you play your cards right, you'll ultimately get a good hit. And let's not forget about the Nightfall mode. When in Nightfall, you can just spring across the map and do some massive damage to unsuspecting survivors, and everything that you pretty much do is amplified a lot more. Again, the Dredge is just pretty damn well balanced and exceeds when it comes down to map mobility, even more so than Singularity, because you can do this at any point in time without needing to require to shoot a pod, and just having that pressure is pretty good. And then having the ability to use your Remnant in Chase is pretty good as well, putting him high on the B list. Next on the list is the Deathslinger, and this is starting the B+ list. So the Deathslinger is pretty good with some really good strong add-ons as well that you can use to really benefit your kit. If someone's going to a vault, if they're going to pallets, you can essentially zone them if you're playing your cards right. If not, you can shoot. And if they vault over, you get them. If they're on the other side of the pallet, you can reel them in closer to you and get them. If they decide to drop the pallet, you can break the chain and put them into deep wounds. So there's a lot that's going on for you. Now, if you actually play Deathslinger pretty well, this can be a nightmare towards some of the survivors, especially in some of the stronger loops in the game, because you can stop them from making it to a pallet or a vault. So that way, anytime someone's looping you pretty good, take the Killer Shack for example, if you can pull off a good shot while they're vaulting, you're stopping that loop ultimately really quickly. And that's some of the best one-on-one potential chases that we have versus any of the other killers on the list. Now, Deathslinger is a little bit of a slower killer, and having that map pressure is going to be so key for him, and if you can't get that working, it's going to be really hard to stop the survivors. Now, moving slower and only having a certain range with your shot makes that really hard, and if you get a wide open map, it could be GG's for a Deathslinger, which is sad because Deathslinger could be so much better if there was just something in his kit that can help with stopping those generators. Obviously, I guess you can use perks, but just based-wise, it's going to be hard in order to do that. Nonetheless, though, having that fantastic one-on-one chase potential is great, and this can even work when people are going for saves, going for rescues, etc. Just reeling them in, stopping them from doing their action, and then hurting them. Sadako is next on the list, or the Onryo, I should say, and this is the new and improved Onryo. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this is pretty much M1 heaven, especially if you can get those condemns going. Condemn actually means something now, and you have to keep an eye on it because with condemn building so much more quicker, it's easy for Sadako just to tunnel people out and kill them straight up. Now, even against a good team, Sadako can still be pretty deadly. Now, there's no anti-loop to this, so you will have a little bit of a difficult time just chasing survivors through pallets, but you don't even need to do that. Just spam teleport to different TVs, come on out, and then you're pretty much good to go. Keeping that pressure up and up and up until someone gets condemned, and then just getting them out of the game. And even if you're not getting those condemned kills, people will have to worry about keeping their condemned in check, or else they'll ultimately die. So it always stops them from doing certain actions. So it always stops them from doing certain things because they have to keep that in mind, which just makes Sadako honestly pretty easy to play. We'll see what happens to Sadako in the future, but this change has definitely buffed her up from pretty much one of the worst killers into the game to one of the easiest and best killers in the game, and I'm very curious to see if this is going to stay, if this is going to change, or what the devs are actually going to do. The Knight is next on the list, and I'm sure you guys have seen all of the videos with 3-gen Knights, things like that. The Knight is just a pressure king. I mean, he is fantastic when it comes down to applying pressure to multiple survivors, or even making a one-man chase being so much more difficult than it needs to be. Especially if the person playing the Knight knows how to fully use the kit, it's going to be really difficult to go against them. If you're using the right people, such as the assassin, to just chase people, kick them off gens, and, you know, keep that pressure on a different side of the map while you're chasing someone, it works out fantastic. If you're actively in the chase and you decide to call someone out, you can then cut them off in a different angle, making it really easy to get some hits. So keeping that pressure on people with the Knight is so resourceful. This can even dictate pressure when you're trying to keep generators at bay. As I mentioned, you can be guarding 2 generators while you keep sending your friends to go to another generator and stopping survivors in that area, which also can give you some useful information. There's not too much counters that survivors can do to this besides avoiding it or picking up the flag, which a lot of people don't tend to do, which makes the Knight super duper strong, especially as the gens go lower and lower, because it's less of a chance that they're in a different area. You know that they'll have to be at one of these 3 spots, which makes the Knight really good at his job. Now, ultimately, this can lead to some more boring gameplay, but if you're talking strength-wise only, the Knight is up there. Speaking about boring, the Skull Merchant is next on the list. I've had my personal grievances with the Skull Merchant, but again, if we're just talking about lethal killers, the Skull Merchant is up there. Especially when it comes down to just fewer gens being on the map, 1 or 2 gens remaining, that's where the Skull Merchant really does shine, and that's where we've seen most people play good as the Skull Merchant. You just set up your drones and you get the information when someone is there. If they stay too long, they become exposed and you get some easy downs on them. You can even use this to forcefully get survivors out of certain loops if you want to play it that way, and even use it to your own benefit, getting some speed boosts, etc. Ultimately, the Skull Merchant is pretty effective at her job when it comes down, especially to the late game, because there's not too much that an uncoordinated team can do. And even against a really good coordinated team, it's hard to beat because it's just so much information that she's getting, and it just stops you in your tracks every time you're trying to get any progress whatsoever, putting the Skull Merchant pretty high on this list. Next on the list is the Cenobite, and he's the highest killer in our B+ list. The Cenobite just has, again, everything that you need and then some. First of all, we have the laminate configuration. Survivors have to constantly keep an eye on this, because if they don't, it's going to be miserable for everybody. You won't be able to do anything because chains are going to constantly attack you. So to counter this, somebody has to decide to sacrifice himself and go for the box, which ultimately, in most cases, leads to a chase because the Cenobite will be able to teleport to them. At that point in time, you can easily just initiate that chase, keep that map pressure going while everybody else is doing their thing. When you're in this chase, you also have another power, which allows you to send a chain that you control to stop this survivor. Now, if you're pretty efficient with this and you know how to use it, you can stop the survivors in their tracks, slow them down with multiple chains attacking them, and then get some free hits on them. And this process that keeps going on and on and on, if the survivors have to going for a box, then worry about the chain, is basically a buffed up Sadako at this point. You know, a way buffed up Sadako. It's just so much pressure that keeps on happening over and over and over again that stops every survivor from doing what they're doing to make sure that the box is prioritized. If the box is not prioritized, it works out well in your favor. If it is, it works out well in your favor because you jump into a chase. And if you decide to completely ignore it, someone is still at that box wasting your time solving it while you're probably in a chase, and then you can use your chains to cut that chase down a lot shorter. This also makes some loops in the game a little bit more unsafe because you can slow survivors down, and it makes it very viable, putting the Cenobite at B+. The Hag is next on the list, and she's dropped down a couple of pegs because of the new thing that they incorporated onto her kit where survivors can erase her traps, but ultimately it doesn't mean much. Once you get somebody on the hook, it's pretty much GG's for them. You place a few traps around, someone decides to run in, you teleport, you rinse and repeat the process. Now, survivors will get smart, they'll decide to start crouching, and even at that point, you can kind of sense when someone's going for save when it's been long enough, and then you could just run back in there, repeat the process again. If we're talking about just looping as well, you can place traps at pretty valuable loops, and survivors will sometimes try to figure out if you're actually going to teleport once they trigger a trap or not, and you can get some easy hits on them. On top of that, this works fantastic for map pressure because even though you're a 110 killer, you can just set traps in highly active zones, teleport as soon as they're triggered because it's going to be unsuspecting, and get it to go. So this power works while you're in chase, it works to get the map pressure, and it even works when people are hooked, just rinsing and repeating the process. Now there is a little bit of counterplay now. You can't use flashlights anymore to get rid of the traps, but survivors can just kind of crouch and get rid of them. But it doesn't really mean that much because the chances of this happening are super low because the game's just so fast-paced that you won't have time for it. So once a hag is pretty much set up and ready to go, it is really difficult to beat her. Next on the list is the Executioner. And the Executioner is pretty damn good, I must say. I feel like a lot of people sleep on the Executioner, but he's really good. First and foremost, you can get some really good hits with Rites of Judgment. This is going to stop survivors from going in certain ways, going through vaults, going through pallets. This even works through walls, so you can get some really nice hits on survivors if you can play your cards correctly. On top of that, if someone does get Trail of Tormented and they get tormented, you can then just quickly send them to a cage, and once they're rescued, you can get them out the game ASAP. You don't need to really worry about anything because there's going to be no DS, no BT, none of that, which ultimately leads to a lot of these players tunneling. Although it sucks, it is a pretty good strategy if we're talking about lethalness. So when it boils down to it, you can get information if someone steps in your trails. When you're in chase, you can get some really good hits even through walls, which the only other killer that can really do that effectively is the Nurse, which we know is one of the strongest killers in the game. And then just having that ability to constantly pressure survivors, especially survivors that just were unhooked, really buffs them up when it comes down to it. You don't need to worry too much about having that map pressure because you can just send people flying across the map, forcing survivors to go all the way to another location in order to save them, getting them off their task, which is either healing or on generators, and putting them in an awkward position to then go get a save. There's also some relatively good add-ons that you can run to buff his power up a little bit more, putting him pretty high on the A tier. Next on the list is the brand new Xenomorph. Xenomorph, in my opinion, is a buffed up Demogorgon / Nemesis. There's so many places that you can jump into tunnels to just run around and you're able to pop out and then get that nice pressure. The only counterplay that survivors really have is their flamethrowers that they can place, which are annoying, but there are add-ons to help with this, and then it just becomes a little bit more of a nuisance than anything. You have your tail whip attack that allows you to hit over pallets, over vaults, which makes you pretty lethal if you can get the hang of using it properly, and I'm sure it's going to take some time for people to ultimately get the hang of this, but it becomes really, really lethal because it forces survivors to really dictate where they have to go. They got to be smart about it. This can also help you zone survivors in certain directions because they know that tail whip is coming in due time. So just having that constant map pressure of using portals whenever you want and then being able to hit survivors through pallets and vaults puts you pretty high on the list. It's everything that a good killer needs and a little bit more in that sense because it's not like a Freddy. It's a lot more lethal when it comes down to it. Your, portals are comparable to Demogorgon, but better because you can use it at any point in time. There's no cooldown on it, and you can go to any location on the map, especially if you marked one and you know survivors are in that general area. And then your actual tail whip attack is like Nemesis, but it's a 2-hit, not a 3-hit. So it works out much more effectively in that regard, putting the new alien killer pretty damn high on this list. The Twins are next on the list, and the Twins are just killing machines if played correctly. You obviously see a lot of people slugging with them, and the reason being is that if someone's already injured and you call Victor out, you can down him easily and then go for somebody and keep that pressure going to multiple survivors. Victor is your ultimate weapon. You can jump across vaults, you can jump across pallets, you can latch onto people, keep that pressure going on them, or if they're already injured from whatever the case may be, you can easily down them and keep that pressure going. On top of that, you can body block with characters like Charlotte or even Victor and use Victor for some information as well. So the twins have a really good kit when it comes down to A, getting information, B, having good power when chasing, and C, mobility, because Victor can just run across, and at any time you need to be that 115 killer just to do the job, Charlotte is there to save the day. And while you're in that chase and Victor's recharging, or if you already can, call Victor out and get an easy hit to down the survivor or latch onto them. The Huntress is next on the list, and I'm very happy that Huntress is still high, at least in my opinion. Huntress just has such a strong power when it comes down to it. The only downside to Huntress is that, yes, you can loop her. She is a 110 killer, but at most loops, the Huntress is able to hit you over them. On the loops that she's not able to do that, what survivors tend to do is try to mind game the Huntresses by pallets. If you're a good Huntress, you don't fall for it. You don't pull up your hatchet and wait, and they just continue to run. You eat the pallet, or you can get the hit when you know they're about to drop it. You can keep the pressure going on some of the maps by cross-mapping some of these, which is insanely high level, and you'll really need to know how to do it, but that can keep the pressure going. And the only downside to this is being 110. If you're out of hatchets or if you have to reload, it's a little bit of a hindrance. If you are playing your cards incorrectly, like I said, a good survivor can loop you when it really comes down to it. However, just having that ability to hit somebody with a hatchet and then hit them again really quickly removes all their speed boosts or anything they can do and makes you really lethal. On top of that, if someone is going for a save, if someone's in an awkward position, you can easily hit them and keep that going. You can also have fantastic zoning when it comes down to it, because you just hold a hatchet, wait for them to get into an awkward position, and hit them. It's very rare that I lose a game when I play as the Huntress, because she just has everything that a good killer needs, and then there's some pretty good add-ons that you can use, especially when it comes down to some of the higher rarity add-ons. They just make the game super duper easy. Wesker is next on the list. My man, how can you not like Wesker? I mean, he's fantastic, right? I mean, I guess we made a video talking about why people hate Wesker, but how can you not like Wesker? Wesker is just lethal, man. Wesker is pretty much Nemesis, but buffed up a lot more. I don't know what to really compare him to. First of all, let's talk about the power that he can dash, essentially. It is fantastic when it comes down to cutting off those chases. You know, if you use your dashes correctly, survivors will have such a difficult time looping you, especially at some of the more unsafe loops as well. Even safe loops, he's able to just keep that pressure going. On top of that, if you are infected, unlike Nemesis, this is something that you have to prioritize getting a cure to, so it'll take you off from working generators going for saves, because if you get fully infected, not only do you move slower, but the Nemesis can easily just one-shot you if he manages to get you. It is fantastic to play as Wesker. It feels great to feel playing as Wesker. And just having that power feels so good. You can also use his power, his bound, to go across the map, keep that pressure going. If you're using the right add-ons, you can have a good window to just dictate where you want to go while using his power, ultimately making him really strong. The ability just to stop these loops so quickly is really good, and then you can constantly keep that pressure on multiple survivors by just keeping them infected. Once you truly learn the power of Wesker and how to play efficiently, you can become pretty unstoppable. There's not much a survivor that can do in order to stop you. Next on the list is the Plague, and the potential with the Plague is just insane. Your games typically go one of two ways. Either everybody decides to just chill out, they don't worry about their infection, and they just stayed injured, or everybody decides to heal themselves with the fountains, powering you up even more. So if everybody decides to stay injured, you can easily go to a fountain, get your power, and start snowballing some of the damage. If they decide to heal, you just have so much fountains at your disposal, which realistically, it's going to be really hard for a survivor to outrun that for 60 seconds, especially multiple survivors, because you can hit multiple of them. They can't really go to vaults because you can puke really quickly to them. They can't go to pallets because you can puke straight over them. It's really hard to deal with a really efficient Plague, and keeping that pressure on just works so well. Unlike the Legion, you can't just mend and just chill out. You're always going to be in that broken effect, so a lot of the perks don't really mean much. You won't be able to heal even if you wanted to, so that pressure will always be there throughout the match, making Plague super duper effective at her job, putting her high on this list if played properly. The Artist is next on the list. Again, one of those killers I feel that is really underrated, but I mean, you can be a threat all the time to anybody on the map. Just place your crows down, especially if you're running something like the Severed Hands, toss them at generators, and you're going to get so much information on A, where people are at, and B, you could also injure them. If they already have crows, or if they severed crow into somebody else, you can then send out some more crows, maybe just one of them to do it really quickly and get them injured. On top of that, your power can also be used when it comes down to stopping vaults, stopping pallet looping, whatever the case may be. So having that chase potential is there. Just drop a crow and it will force survivors to either leave or take some crows, or even getting injured by your crows themselves. Now, you used to be able to use a flashlight to stop this, but you can't even do that anymore, so you just gotta run away from these crows. So using that power will help you out so much if you know how to use it well. So while she's not able to walk across the map and have this amazing map pressure, she can easily get this map pressure by just sending a couple of crows in a direction. Especially if you know how to use these crows well, you can even injure somebody with just one use of the crows by putting them in right positions. On top of that, as I mentioned, some of the add-ons that she has are absolutely insane and synergize super duper well with her power. That just makes it so oppressive. So she has everything that she needs. She can attack from a distance, she can attack up close, which can arguably be stronger than attacking from a distance, and then she's just super duper lethal when it comes down to all of it, putting her as the second highest killer on the A tier. Next on the list is the Oni. Oni is crazy strong. Now, at the beginning of the game, it can dictate how your match goes depending on how quickly you can get that first injured survivor. If you can get it relatively quickly, it, in most cases, is a GG's. If it takes a while, you still can, recover. It's not super hard because Oni is a really strong killer. Once you get that injured survivor, you can just farm blood off of them and then get your power going, which gives you insane mobility and a one-shotting capability. This is fantastic because you just run to a generator, find someone, and if you know how to use this power well, as I said with some of the other killers, you can flick around corners and you can knock them really quickly. If they decide to go to a vault, you can still manage to get them because you're so fast, and if they drop a pallet, you can just break it and continue that chase. The add-ons that he has, like Top Knot, things like that, really help him out so much more as well, making it super duper easy to constantly use your power. This also forces all the survivors to heal because if they don't, they're in a state of constantly powering you up, which just cycles you over and over. So they have to heal. Once they're healed up, you're already powered up. You go and you hit them and you injured again, and the cycle continues over and over. If you can master the power of the Oni and understanding the flicks as well, it is nearly impossible to beat a good Oni because he'll just cut around every corner and hit you so easily. The S tier, how about it? Here we are. This Spirit is next on the list. I mean, the Spirit has some fantastic chasing capabilities. I mean, you don't even know where she is. I mean, she's literally invisible. So you can wait by a pallet, you can try to loop it, she'll hear you, she'll find you, she'll track you down and hit you. You can also use this power to just keep the map pressure up, going to different locations, and with some of the add-ons that she has, I mean, it just makes her so much more deadly. The Spirit has been one of the strongest killers in the game for such a long time, and it's so evident why it is because it's so difficult to counter her because you don't really know where she's at. She can just stand still in certain cases, which not so much now, but back in the days, stand still even, and survivors will get baited into panicking and running away, and then you get some easy hits on them. Obviously that doesn't really work. Well, it still does work in some cases, but against good survivors that's not going to work. At that point, just wait for your power to recharge, use your power, and then you're second guessing whether you're coming from one side or the other, and that can lead to some easy hits. She is so consistently good. And it doesn't even matter what map you're on. It doesn't matter how skilled you are. If you're playing as Spirit, chances are you will do well. The Blight is the next killer on our list. The mobility that the Blight has is just absolutely insane. Going across the map at light speed, seeing where all the survivors are at while you're doing this, and then instantly getting into a chase because you can do that. If you're really good with the Blight, you can cut around corners and make all of the safe loops unsafe and keep that pressure going.
This is absolutely insane, the amount of things that the Blight can do. The speed is a killer as well, because by the time you think you're gonna make it to a vault or make it to a pallet, he's already on your ass chasing you because he's just so quick. Now, there are some things that are a little bit hard to hit. You know, sometimes you don't get that bounce on a wall. That's just more gameplay sides. Once you get the hang of it and once you truly master the power, it's gonna be so hard beating a Blight. I'm sure you guys have seen some of the flicks that Blights are able to do as well, and I mean, you can just almost instantly turn around and hit people. There's not much debate. The Blight is the second best killer in the game. And of course, the strongest killer in the game, no shock, is the Nurse. She just counters everything that the survivors can do. I mean, it's just so easy to play as the Nurse. You just blink, try to mind game the survivors, and you're all good to go. I'm sure there's not much debate needed about the Nurse. When there's another killer that can ignore every single mechanic in the game, then and only then will there be a question on if the Nurse is the strongest killer or not. But until that day comes, the Nurse will reign supreme. Well, there you go, kings and queens. A little bit of a lengthy video, but that is our tier list. I wanted to touch up a lot more on some of these killers. I'll probably leave some notes here and there with some of their actual pros and cons to break it down a little bit more than I actually explained, but that is my tier list. I hope you guys did enjoy. Again, this is just my opinion. This is what I think. This is how I feel about the characters in the game. And I'm sure I spoke about your main and you're probably going to be upset, or maybe you completely agree. I would love to hear your comments down below. A big thank you again to today's sponsor. And as always, I'm the King. I tip my crown to you guys, and we'll see you in the fog.